Hi, this is Mike Fauché, and I don't usually make commentary type videos, but today I want to talk about the QNAP security and NAS security in general. There's been a lot of negative publicity lately, and I wanted to kind of go through some thoughts as well as point out some different perspectives and discuss responsibility. And of course, talk about how do we protect ourselves. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe and hit that notifications icon so you'll be notified when there's new content. If you follow my channel, you'll know that I'm a heavy QNAP user and have been and continue to preach their value and functionality. What may not be obvious is at work I have over a dozen Synology units, so my comments and opinions today come from an equal perspective and not just a QNAP fanboy. That said, the reality is both QNAP and Synology, as well as other NAS vendors, are all subject to ransomware and vulnerabilities. Not just because of their brands, but because of the sheer number of features that they come with, the convenience they provide in terms of connectivity, and the support of many third-party applications. Any device, whether it's a computer, NAS, IoT, or even your router itself, is a target if it's misconfigured or if it's facing the internet. The difference between any of the companies is how they react to these problems and how fast they can correct it. But at the end of the day, it's what you do that truly matters and the steps you've taken to protect yourself. If you've lost access to your data, the brand of hardware or storage that you use is of very little consolation. QNAP is a newer company and a larger company with approximately 30% more sales than Synology, and tends to use more modern hardware and targets value and features. Synology, on the other hand, is a slightly smaller company and has been in business a little bit longer, tends to focus more on basics, and tends to be more conservative in terms of features, and is usually at a higher cost and a lower hardware spec. One of the main reasons I've always used and recommended QNAPs is, in my opinion, you get more for your money, and it comes with a better choice of hardware for typical home applications. That said, offering more features and being a larger company also means a larger threat surface. And if you're creating ransomware, why not attack the biggest player in the business where you can have the largest impact? Being the largest player, you also have the greatest responsibility to address issues when they come up. And there have been times in the past where QNAP has been really slow to respond. If you look at each company's security vulnerability list for the last couple of years that are posted on their respective websites, you're not going to see that much difference. They both have been subjected to a numerous number of vulnerabilities, but yet you tend to hear more about QNAP vulnerabilities, partly because they're a larger player, and partly because there's been a couple of vulnerabilities directed specifically at QNAP. Also, in some cases, QNAP has been slower to respond with fixes than it really should have been. If we agree that both companies, and all NAS companies for that matter, are targets, then we have to ask ourselves, what can we do about protecting our data? Companies today try to differentiate themselves by packing more stuff and features into their device so that we'll buy theirs over the competition. This is especially true when it comes to connectivity, but unfortunately, the more we expose ourselves out there, the more the chances are that we'll be a victim. Having all these features available does not necessarily relieve us from some of the responsibility and the understanding of how things work. When we buy a car, it's up to us to learn how to drive and to practice safety. To a large extent, this applies to anything connected to the internet. Because the company supplies numerous options and features, doesn't mean it makes sense to use them or use them all at the same time until we better understand how each of them works. The biggest failing of most companies today, especially QNAP, and to a lesser degree Synology, is that they all want to turn this stuff on by default, with the premise that it's making it easier and providing better experience for their end users. But by doing that, they increase the opportunities of things going wrong. Both companies can configure their device just as securely, but QNAP aims to be more at the home market and Synology more at the small business market, so their configurations are different, even though each could really configure exactly the same and both would be just as equally secure. What should really happen is that all the non-critical features should be off until we can learn safely how to turn them on. Someone buying a NAS for the first time needs to know all the things it can do, but everything should be off by default until the user turns them on. And once they're turned on, it should make suggestions on how to change the defaults and configure it in the safest way possible. Currently, to the best of my knowledge, no company is taking this approach, so the responsibility falls squarely in our hands. I hear a lot of comments and blaming online about these companies for our data loss. And though I believe that companies need to do their absolute best to prevent and correct issues, so should we. In my opinion, and based on my own experience, it's unreasonable for us to use a product in a critical application that is possibly connected to the internet and can be subject to hardware failures and not have some kind of protection. No NAS available today, regardless of brand, is a backup, and it should not be the only place that you have your data. Just as we wouldn't drive a car without insurance, we shouldn't have our data unprotected no matter how good the company is. No company or their products is 100%, and all it takes is one time for us to lose everything, whether it's from ransomware, hardware failures, or even theft. We have to own at least part of the responsibility and make sure that we have a way to recover if something were to go wrong. In the end, I'm not defending QNAP for some slow responses, carelessness in some cases, but rather saying every company is vulnerable, and that regardless of what NAS you buy, learn about the features, best practices, and keep as much of it off the internet as possible. And most importantly, get a backup solution. There's so many inexpensive options out there to choose from. Pick one or two of them and back up your data regularly. Ask either a Synology or a QNAP user who's lost data in the past if having a specific brand was any consolation. And I can tell you from my own experiences it isn't, as I've lost data from both brands, and I no longer rely on any one company to protect my data. For me, I'm going to still continue to use and recommend QNAP units along with a good backup strategy as my weapon of choice. In closing, I'll leave you with a few thoughts. Avoid the internet's overreaction and clickbait stories, and do your own research. Make sure you're always patching your devices to keep it current, and when a vulnerability is discovered, understand what it is, how it gets into your system, and what can be done to safeguard your data. Make sure that when you buy a NAS that you understand how it's connected to the internet and learn about how to minimize your exposure, such as changing your defaults or turning off services that you don't need. And lastly, but most importantly, rely on yourself to establish a backup solution for your data. If you have your data protected on the cloud or offline storage, for example, it's trivial to copy your data back to a new device that was either reset or replaced and not lose anything. I know that many of you won't agree, and you really want somebody else to take responsibility in keeping your data safe. But if you find a perfect company that doesn't make mistakes and is always ahead of every issue, then please let me know who they are, because I haven't found one yet. That's why for me, I use multiple backups, and I rely on myself, not the QNAPs or Synologies of the world, to keep my data safe. In the end, it's my responsibility, not theirs. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.